From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. K-State's Dan O'Brien is up first today. He'll tell us what he found out directly from a USDA official about that much-criticized corn acreage number reported by the department last Monday. And he'll talk about lasting volatility in the row crop markets for the remainder of the year during his weekly segment on the grain market trends. Also, K-State's Erick DeWolf announces that the university's 2019 wheat variety disease and insect ratings are now out. This information can help guide you producers in your variety selection for next year's crop. And K-State's Mary Knapp will be alongside for a look at Kansas agricultural weather, including the just-released fall weather outlook. All that here on Agriculture Today.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Greetings to you from the campus of Kansas State University. You're tuned in once again to Agriculture Today. Well, there's no way to sugarcoat it. It was a rocky week for the grain trades, and the catalyst in large part was that USDA crop acreage report, which was fraught with surprise, as you know. Dan O'Brien is with us once more to break down the grain market trends this week. He is a grain market economist, K-State Research and Extension. Dan, that corn acreage figure that the USDA released on Monday was met with some skepticism by the market, by producers as well, and you actually had a chance to meet with an official from the National Agricultural Statistics Service about this report and actually what went into it.
Yes, we had an extension conference in Cincinnati where the state extension grain and livestock marketing specialists meet, and Lance Honig from USDA NASS was there. So we really tried to drill down and gain an accurate understanding from USDA NASS's perspective of what was occurring and what's represented in the corn acreage and soybean acreage numbers. So frankly, for any of the acreage figures that came out of that August 12th report. And, of course, the big issue that's wrestled with was the 90 million acres, 90.005 million acres planted that the USDA represented. Also, you have, along with that, just a little over 82 million acres harvested as a projection with a estimate of just a little over 91% harvested the planted acreage. And there's the yield number of 169.5, and you bring the harvested acres, the planted, harvested together, times the yield, and you end up with a production figure of 13.9. And so the market saw that 13.9, reacted bearishly, and I think as you've seen what's happened in the futures markets, again, the report came out on Monday. You see where we wound up, and at the end of the day yesterday, on Thursday, December corn closing down to $3.71, below $4. November soybeans, $8.70. Actually, November soybeans were down from the previous few days, but not as bad as they had been in some lows that happened a month or so ago. Mm-hmm. And even wheat being pulled into all this, closing to the downside. So really, you come back to the question, what's in that 90 million acres for corn and in that 76.7 million acres planted for soybeans? And at least as we understand it, when you look at the 90 million acres figure for corn, what's likely to show variation yet down the road is that as we planted corn acres for cover, as we're allowed by USDA rules, that's in there. And also anything that's silage is in there too. Mm-hmm. Given so much corn is planted late, at risk in those eastern and northern Corn Belt areas, we could have a fair amount of silage going on. So the 90 million acres figure is probably probably a very accurate figure, but it'll have some things that'll have to come out of it yet. Again, the cover crop numbers and the silage as usual.
So you're saying that what that 90 million acre number represents is being misconstrued, and that recognizing what that number truly is saying would be constructive for the market, put it that way.
Yes, and really, it's not the 90 million acres as so much by itself. It's the harvested acres. The 90 million acres times 91% harvested to planted, which they took as probably on the high side. If you look back to, quote, analog years when we had a lot of moisture, 1993, et cetera, we ended up with closer to 85, 86, 87 million acres. Mm-hmm. So you had that number that's out there. You also had this prevented planting number of 11 million acres. So on the day of the report, people were saying, well, gosh, does that mean that we planted 90 million acres of corn? We had prevented planted for 11. So, gosh, we were going to plant 101 million acres of corn. That's really not what happened. I think as people have thought about what the economic incentives were in front of people, farmers as they were signing up, when they went into FSA to inform them of prevented planting, they were the only people that knew in their minds what they were actually going to plant there. Some of that was corn, some of that was soybeans. They looked at the choice of the amount of money you could make for signing up for prevented planting for corn relative to beans, and they had every incentive, since corn had a higher revenue figure, to sock as many acres in to corn prevented planting as they could. And there were some limitations to that in terms of what crop insurance numbers had been in the past, et cetera. So they signed up as many acres as they could as corn prevented planting, because that's where the money was, and what they had left, then they put over into other crops, mainly soybeans. So that 11 million acres of corn that's designated as prevented planting, probably because farmers are rational economic agents, probably includes X number of acres that are actually going to be soybeans, but where the money was to sign up for corn. There's another number that's out there. The Farm Service Agency had come out with about 85, 86 million acres that had been signed up as planted. There have been reports out in the public from Farm Service Agency, at least quotes, that, gosh, they're having a record sign-up, and they were hiring extra people to process all of this, et cetera. So the 85, 86 million acre figure that's planted is probably on the low side. They're still backlogged, even though these numbers are, they made a Herculean effort to get all those numbers as early as possible, but still, August is early for them, for the FSA. Where will that number end up at? Probably 87, 88, something like that, or probably 80. Let's think in terms of 87 million acres. So then you have the Farm Service Agency number. Let's say it ends up at 87 million. You've got the NASS number at 90 million now that has cover crop, silage, probably more silage than usual. Those two figures are going to come together. Mm-hmm. So right now, if you were looking at probably where we'll end up, it's probably something around 87, plus or minus a little bit, on final corn planted acres. And even on those acres, we'll back off the probably higher than normal losses, a little lower than normal harvested to planted 80, 81 million acres, 80, 82, what they estimated at on the high side. So 80 million acres planted presents a little tighter scenario than what the USDA presented in that report, and we haven't even talked about yields yet.
Right, and once more, that was a point of deliberation amongst producers and others as they saw that report, whether that yield figure is going to hold up, and that is obviously contingent upon weather and upon the ability of that crop to make before that first frost.
I could not say anything better than what you just said. It was a survey number, and NASS assumes normal weather to the end. And we might have normal weather to the end. Heaven help us if we don't, given all the late planted corn out there. But would not be surprising to see that number come down a fair amount. Again, the pre-report estimate was about 165. And if you were looking at the USDA's 169.5 figure versus the 165 that the market expected, at least I personally would lean towards what the market expected. And we have crop surveys going on as we speak, or at least this week, in parts of the Corn Belt, and their estimates of yields were lower than the USDA's projections. So the takeaway from all of this is that we still have moving parts in both the corn and the soybean numbers too, and these other crops.
The soybeans and corn are in tandem here. So
yes, yeah. Well, the acres are playing back and forth,
right.
And the yield figure 48.5. Where are soybean yields going to go? Well, what type of a late summer are we going to have? With all this uncertainty, we probably won't know this outcome for the size of those two major crops and the others as well until we actually harvest the crop in the field. It just backloads the volatility. There's one other way to look at this too, in that when the USDA has challenges figuring out the size of the crop, when do they finally reconcile the crop numbers with what happened in the field? Well, they get to a stocks report. We're going to have a late harvest. We'll find out what the November 1 stocks numbers are in the January report. I guess the way to think about this is for people to think about managing the risks and uncertainties of these markets from now through January, February, March of next year, because it'll probably take that long to unwind all these questions.
All of this will be on the plate as you talk the grain outlook at the Risk and Profit Conference here on the K-State campus next week, Dan.
Well, yes. Along with talking about this, we're going to look towards framing how the rest of this year will unwind, when information is coming, what the risks are, risks and opportunities. And there's another session I'm involved in talking about actual marketing strategies for this year. And really, with all this uncertainty, what do you look at? Well, some options. If anything, with the markets diving off and being so pessimistic, but still the possibility of surprises out there, this would be a good time to give some careful thought to the options market to see, what buying calls or puts could do to at least position ourselves to try to cut off the tails, quote, of the risk that will be before us in the next 5-6 months.
More good reasons to take in that Risk and Profit Conference next week, Thursday and Friday, as a matter of fact, here at K-State. Find out more at agmanager.info on that. Dan, thanks so much.
Thanks, Eric. Take care.
He's a grain market economist, K-State Research and Extension, along with us from his office in Colby, Northwest Kansas. That's Dan O'Brien. This is Agriculture Today.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
We're back now on this Agriculture Today. Well, as we provide you the latest information generated by K-State researchers on wheat production this past growing season, we've yet more useful information for you producers as you head into your wheat variety selection process for the 2019-20 crop. Erick DeWolf is along our way once more. As you know, Erick is a wheat disease specialist, K-State Research and Extension. And Erick, we've invited you by today to let us know that the 2019 K-State Wheat Disease and Insect Ratings are now compiled and available for producers' view, right?
That's right. So they are definitely available and on the web and available. We push them out through social media, and some newsletter articles will go out very soon that will help people find that. But certainly they can get it online through the K-State Research and Extension bookstore.
And remind us of what this resource is and how it's pulled together, if you would.
Well, this is an important resource for us at K-State as we go to evaluate wheat varieties and how they perform every year. The primary purpose here is to help growers make informed decisions about the varieties that they're planning to grow. This is prime time for a lot of growers as they're wrapping up their harvest and trying to calculate the numbers of what production practices they want to pursue and what varieties they want to grow in this next growing season. So
the information that they see in this report based on plot observations from around the state?
It is. So if you remember historically, we've done this for many, many years of traveling around the state during the prime time for our extension. We do a lot of wheat variety demonstration plots, but in the meantime, we're also evaluating as many locations and as many counties and regions of the state to evaluate how these different varieties are comparing, how they're holding up to different diseases. For example, this year, stripe rust, leaf rust, some of the leaf spotting diseases were major problems for us again in Kansas. And we had a good opportunity because of that effort to update those ratings this year.
As a matter of fact, this sort of growing season is, for this purpose, ideal in evaluating resistance in varieties, isn't it? Because of the heavy disease pressure.
Well, it does allow us to fill in some gaps very quickly in understanding what it is. And I think that information and knowledge has a great value for people as they make their decisions about varieties. For example, we might look at growers and how the varieties they select now influences not only the yield and productivity, but also the disease management practices that they may find themselves in need for next year. So to select a very highly susceptible variety to stripe rust, leaf rust, to some leaf spotting diseases would increase the chances that they're going to need a foliar fungicide in the following year. So if you're a grower that wants to try and reduce that input cost or the potential need for that input cost, the variety you pick now can go a long way to reducing that risk or the need for that additional $20 an acre input cost.
And once more, all of this is based on what happened in 2018 and 19. We do not yet, as you note, have the wheat disease loss figures in for this past growing season, but you would have to describe it as a healthy disease year, not so healthy for the crop, though.
Yeah, so this really was a big disease year for us. Stripe rust, leaf rust were both back with vengeance again after a little bit of a break in the drought year of 2018. But with the ample rainfall that we had back in May, conditions seemed ideal in many areas of the state for the development of both those rust diseases. We also mentioned some leaf spots in general. In this case, it was the Septoria tritici, or speckled leaf blotch pathogen, which, if you remember, is splash dispersed or spread by splashing rain. So again, that rainfall that we had back in the end of April and well into May really favored the development of that disease as well. As we approached harvest, we also saw above normal levels of fusarium head blight or head scab in eastern and central Kansas. And that was also a frustrating issue for growers that they may still be dealing with as they prep seed and check the germination of their crop.
So as producers evaluate varieties and to look at these ratings on the various diseases, you say that one thing really does stand out. It's back to that rust disease complex. The adaptability to resistance now is starting to become rather worrisome, you say, Eric.
I think so. So, historically we've known this has been an issue with leaf rust, so that maybe that's a good example to use. It's not uncommon for that fairly diverse fungal population to find a way around the widely deployed or widely used genetic sources of genetic resistance in our variety. And once a variety gets out on a lot of acres, it puts a lot of pressure on those rust populations. Once they find a way around that genetic resistance, there's really nothing that stands in their way from rapid increase and high risk for yield loss then. As we've gotten more experience with stripe rust, remember it didn't really emerge on the scene here because of some temperature adaptations until around the year 2000. But in the last 20 years or so, this has quickly emerged as our number one disease problem in the state. And we're finding as that population gets more and more established in our region that we're finding more and more diversity within that population. And that diversity, of course, means it's harder and harder for us to maintain sources of genetic resistance to that disease.
In addition to the rusts, they seem to capture the headlines. As producers prepare for this next growing season, what other diseases should they truly key in on based on what we experienced this past crop?
Well, so I think there's a number of things. Rusts are going to be the top priority everywhere in the state because of their importance, because of that ready ability to adapt. As we look in central Kansas, I think diseases to keep an eye on would be some of those leaf spotting diseases. The Septoria tan spot complex of diseases are important. As we have seen the acres of corn increase in central Kansas, I think we're increasingly seeing more and more frequent outbreaks of fusarium head blight and head scab. And wherever growers can pick up develop resistance to that disease that's often problematic to control with fungicides, I would say that's a benefit as well. As we move west in the state, I think diseases like wheat streak mosaic also rise to the top as well. So historically we haven't had much to offer besides maybe a few varieties with intermediate levels of genetic resistance, but there are some higher levels of genetic resistance available for at least portions of that complex of viral diseases there. So wherever they are growers that are concerned about that, they know that they're at a high-risk situation because of volunteer wheat or just a high history of high levels of disease in their area and their operation, that I would really direct them to those varieties that have higher levels of genetic resistance.
Well, then, as a producer, we get a hold of a copy of the wheat disease ratings for this year. What will they see? They'll see a list of varieties and then a cross-reference with the diseases that are prominent out there?
Well, if growers have seen this before, you'll know that the main format or the bulk of the data is presented in a table that summarizes 12 different diseases and also the Hessian fly. Though also in recent years we've added some additional agronomic information. Romulo Lalato has done a great job in his time at K-State of adding some of that information, again gathered from all over the state and different production regions with as many observations as we can summarize over multiple years. So things like height, maturity, straw strength, drought tolerance, and all of K-State's observations, at least as best we can, are summarized in that publication. Also, some changes we've made in recent years highlight some of the varieties that are more widely grown or appear to be up-and-coming varieties. So we've included some half-page write-ups and graphics to help people visualize how these varieties compare, and some short summaries, text summaries, to help people key in on those important characteristics.
It really has become a very robust publication for producers to use. Don't want to overlook the insect ratings part of it, too. Your colleague, Jeff Whitworth, contributing that information.
Absolutely. So Hessian fly continues to be a persistent problem for us, and there is some valuable genetic resistance out there to those insect pests as well, and an important contribution to that publication.
All right. So, to let folks know for sure how they can obtain the wheat disease and insect ratings fact sheet for this year, it's fairly simple, is it not, Eric?
It is. I think I would recommend you either go to the Extension Plant Pathology website or the K-State's Research and Extension bookstore.
plantpath.ksu.edu. One website, ksre.ksu.edu, the other, but it's at either location. And again, this can be part of selecting a variety. It's not the entire story, but this is a cog in the decision-making, isn't it?
I think so. So certainly there's a lot more that goes into being a good wheat variety beyond disease resistance. This is an important component that contributes to the stability and long-term longevity of a wheat variety in the state. But certainly we want to pick those that have the other agronomic characteristics, yield, quality, test weight, and other characteristics that are so important for our wheat production in the state.
It is a piece of the puzzle, however, that is disease resistance in our wheats as we plant them this fall. Eric, as always, thanks for coming over.
You're welcome.
And telling us about the freshly released 2019 K-State Wheat Disease and Insect Ratings for the varieties grown in Kansas. Erick DeWolf is a wheat disease specialist at K-State and one of the co-authors of that important publication out of the university. This is Agriculture Today. We'll be back after these moments away with today's agricultural news headlines, plus much more yet to come, here on the K-State Radio Network.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
We're back now on Agriculture Today, coming to you from the campus of Kansas State University. Erick Atkinson here with today's agricultural news headlines now. These courtesy in part of DTN. China issued a statement yesterday warning that they would take action if the U.S. moves ahead with 10% tariffs on some Chinese goods on September the 1st. The China cabinet said they would take unspecified necessary countermeasures if the U.S. tariffs move ahead. The one-line statement did not indicate what the countermeasures would be, nor did they mention the announcement by the U.S. that a portion of the tariffs would be delayed until December the 15th. Originally, the Trump administration said those tariffs on $300 billion in Chinese goods would start on the 1st of September. However, Tuesday's announcement did pare that level of goods down to around $112 billion. The Chinese statement also made no mention of the in-person talks in September. China's finance ministry issued a statement that indicated the tariffs would run counter to the agreement that the president and Chinese President Xi Jinping reached in June, and that they would get off the right track of resolving disputes via negotiation. Meanwhile, the president said on Twitter that good things were stated on the call with China the other day, as he put it. That's a reference to the telephone discussions between U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer and Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin and key Chinese officials. Proposed changes to federal hours of service regulations for truck operators were announced yesterday by the Department of Transportation. Those proposed changes would allow drivers to pause their 14-hour clock for up to 3 consecutive hours and go off duty in that time period, extending their on-duty window by the same amount. Drivers would be required to take a 10-hour off-duty break at the conclusion of their 14-hour on-duty hours after using that proposed pause option, as they're calling it. The break must be at least 30 minutes long under the proposal. Also, the 11-hour drive time limit for an on-duty shift would remain. Allowing drivers to pause the 14-hour clock would help them avoid the peak traffic hours, weather events, and help mitigate the effect of long detention times, according to the proposal, which was announced yesterday by the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. The USDA is giving farmers more time to pay crop insurance premiums without added interest added to the bills. Here's more from the USDA's Gary Crawford.
Many farmers get their crop insurance premium bills issued to them around this time every year, let's say August 15th, with a pay-by date of September 30th. If the premium's not paid by October 1st, farmers start to get interest charges added on to that bill.
It's 1.25% a month, so it can start adding up. You know, these days a lot of the producers have a pretty good-sized premium bill.
But Risk Management Agency Administrator Martin Barbary says this year USDA is giving producers another couple of months before the interest charge kicks in. So in this example, the date would be December 1st. The reason for doing this?
With this late planted crop, many producers across the country are going to be late harvesting, and their premiums would have started accruing interest on October 1st for their spring planted crops. What we've done is deferred that interest accrual for 2 months. Gives the producers a little more time this fall to get their crops harvested and get some cash flow coming in.
This is not unprecedented. USDA did it for the 2012 drought and the hurricanes of 2017 and 18. Each time, the basic reason, the same.
We're here to be flexible, and we're here to take care of producers' needs.
In Washington, Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
And yesterday, the Natural Resources Conservation Service announced $1.9 million in funding for 15 soil science collaborative research projects focusing on soil science and soil survey research, one of which will be conducted at K-State. K-State will utilize data in the Soil Survey Geographic Database soil maps with digital soil mapping techniques to create more detailed maps with higher resolution as part of that overall research initiative. Variety selection remains an important factor in succeeding with a wheat crop. However, approaches to crop management may have superseded variety performance in terms of importance. That's being illustrated by ongoing research by a K-State wheat production specialist, as highlighted this week by Marcia Boswell on the Kansas Wheat Scoop. Marcia?
Farmers across the state have access to many of the most cutting-edge wheat varieties ever bred. These varieties are all created with performance in mind. So how can producers gain that coveted yield bump when the dozens of varieties at their fingertips are, by and large, on a fairly level playing field? According to Dr. Romulo Lolato, wheat and forage extension specialist at Kansas State University, I think we are at the point where we have so many excellent varieties that we don't have to be quite as picky. There are a lot of really good options, so we have to look at management as well. That's what the last 19 years of data that we have collected is telling us, that management practices are very, very important. According to this data, management accounts for 44 to 77% of yield variation. Because of this large yield gap, Lolato says it's time to manage wheat. To no one's surprise, region and irrigation make the top of the list for yield-producing management practices, but application of foliar fungicide and sowing date are also incredibly important for both irrigated and dryland farmers. Sowing dates can have a huge impact on final yields, but the optimal sowing date varies by region. Western Kansas farmers have an optimal date of October 1st. North Central's optimal date is October 10th, and South Central's is October 12th. Planting after these optimal dates can mean substantial yield penalties. The South Central region loses about 1.1 bushels per day for around 20 days following October 12th, but that loss increases to around 2.7 bushels per day after those initial 20. North Central Kansas consistently loses about 2.1 bushels per day, while the Western region loses a whopping 3.5 bushels per day. Lolato and his team have also found that seed treatments, like insecticides and fungicides, have a higher yield bump in good seasons, while foliar fungicides are beneficial in all seasons, but have more yield gain in those higher-yielding seasons. Micronutrient applications have had a negligible bump during high-performing years, while it has a monster gain of 9.7 bushels per acre during low-performance years. Lolato's research has also focused on sulfur. Kansas has seen the removal of sulfur from the soil during wheat production exceeding the amount of atmospheric deposition since 2000, which he attributes as an effect of the Clean Air Act. This legislation has meant lower levels of air pollution, but less pollution means less sulfur coming in during rainfall. Sulfur application has a slight yield drag of 0.6 bushels per acre during high-performing years, like 2016 and 17, but had a net gain of around 4.9 bushels per acre during drier years like 2018. These projects were funded by the Kansas Wheat Commission and the Kansas Wheat Alliance. For more information on research being funded by the Kansas Wheat Commission, please visit kansaswheat.org. For Kansas Wheat, I'm Marcia Boswell.
Thanks, Marcia. We'll return shortly with K-State's Mary Knapp on Agriculture Today.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
Up for you now on this Agriculture Today, our weekly get-together with climatologist Mary Knapp of K-State Research and Extension, as we glance once more at Kansas agricultural weather and pass along the latest from the Weather Data Library here at the university. Well, this past week, Mary, was active to say the least, including storms in northeast Kansas last night that caused some havoc. But start with the temperatures. Those could be deceiving given our humidity around.
Right. If we start with the temperatures, and we'll look at our weekly average as we usually do, statewide we averaged a whopping half a degree warmer than normal. Now, in western Kansas, they were a little bit on the warmer side. They averaged between 1 and 2 degrees warmer than normal in those areas. But those areas also dropped down into the 50s for their lows. They got down to 59 in all of those western divisions. In contrast, the eastern divisions were reaching to get up to 90. We did hit a 96 and a 98 in east central and southeast Kansas, but in northeast Kansas, we only made it up to 92. Now, if you throw in the heat index values, and they were much higher, we had, as been the case for most of the summer, a lot of very high dew points, and that translates to high heat indexes and the uncomfortable conditions that we experience through most of the week. The other difficulty with it is that winds were fairly light in the eastern part of the state. So, again, you're not getting any breeze through, and that makes it much more uncomfortable. Now, that was in the eastern part of the state. But in the western areas, they had much more wind, and they had some storms go through there. At our Colby Mesonet station, we measured a wind gust of over 72 miles per hour. That has created some problems. Some of the standing crops were blown over with that. There was also hail to accompany the storms in western Kansas, and that, again, wreaked its own havoc. So while they were happy to see some of the moisture out west, they would have preferred not to have the wind and hail to go along with it.
And when it comes to moisture outright, it was irregular around Kansas. Although there were deluges, there were other spots which really went wanting the last several days.
Right. And even out in the western areas, like I noted, everybody was above average for the period, but that didn't mean that it was evenly distributed across the region. And that can be seen in a couple of the storm events that went through. Last night, we had storms that went through the area. We had an inch plus in the Manhattan area, but you go over just a little bit towards Abilene and Clay Center, and pretty much nothing out of it. In the Wabaunsee County area, there are reports of 4 inches or more. Again, a fairly narrow band, but if you were underneath it, you got quite a bit with some attendant flooding along with that. But you didn't have to be very far away, and what you saw was the lightning show from the storm and not much of the rain.
How are our growing degree units doing of late? We've been closely monitoring that because of the lateness of planting and such.
Well, we've been fairly close to our normal growing degree unit accumulation, but as you noted, because a lot of producers were as much as 3 to 6 weeks behind their normal planting date, we're still fairly late on the crops. We're not going to gain ground very quickly because our accumulations are simply not that rapid. We're not seeing that much. That's one thing where those warm nighttime low temperatures are going to favor degree day accumulation, particularly in corn, because that formula caps the maximum temperature at 86 but has no cap on the minimum. If you're talking sorghum, you're perfectly happy with highs in the 90s. What you don't want to see is those low temperatures dropping down into that lower range. Mid-50s or below, you can actually delay the crop development simply because of the cool conditions. So we'd like to have a nice extended fall pattern, highs in the upper 80s, lower 90s, and lows in the mid-60s would be ideal to finish off the season.
And you've given us a peek at that extended outlook, which we want to get into. But for the immediate forecast, more unsettled weather ahead?
We have some unsettled weather for the weekend, but if we look at the 6 to 10 and 8 to 14-day outlooks, both of those favor drier than normal conditions for much of the state. There is a chance for above normal moisture along the eastern borders of the state, basically the Brown County down to Cherokee County area. But if you go a little bit further west of that, so you're in the Douglas County area, you're into the drier than normal. So a very narrow band on the eastern edges of the state.
And the outlooks for September and the 3-month outlook covering the fall have now been posted. Interesting observations there, Mary.
Right. On the good news side of things, it looks like we've got an increased chances of warmer than normal temperatures throughout both September and into the fall. That would be favorable because we could get that accumulation to continue. It doesn't preclude a freezing temperature in there. As we move into that November time frame, we would be expecting to see some freezing temperatures. But if we keep the pattern that we have right now, we're likely to have an average to a later than average first freeze, and that, again, would be very welcome. On the precipitation side, it's equally likely to be above or below normal. It does not look like the wetter than normal pattern that we were seeing last year at this time, and again, that would be welcome for most of the state. The Southwest would like to at least see normal precip, get some moisture in the ground for that winter wheat. They've got areas that are already in moderate drought. They'd like to have a little bit more fall moisture to alleviate that. But in the eastern part of the state, we would take it to be slightly on the drier side just to get that harvest done in a timely manner rather than the delayed harvest that we faced last year.
There's something to be said for a tranquil fall. That may be in the offing, Mary. And we will talk next Friday once more. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Eric.
Climatologist Mary Knapp, K-State Research and Extension, and likewise, our thanks to you for being along with us. Eric Atkinson here. This has been Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.